Useless. Utterly and completely useless. Beatrice Sterling's voice, sharp as shattered crystal, echoed in the cavernous marble foyer. Do you have any idea how much that vase was worth? More than you'll make in a lifetime of scrubbing floors. Alara Vance stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, her simple gray uniform a stark contrast to the opulent, sterile white of the penthouse. Her gaze was fixed on the porcelain shards at Beatrice's feet, a casualty of a clumsy guest from the previous night's party. A party Alara was now tasked with erasing every trace of. It was already broken when I entered the room, Miss Sterling. I was simply beginning to clean it up. Lying now, are we? Beatrice sneered, her perfectly painted lips twisting into a parody of a smile. It's always the same with your kind. You break things, you steal things, and then you lie about it. From the top of the sweeping glass staircase, Julian Croft watched the scene unfold, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He was the master of this domain, a billionaire who had inherited an empire of steel and glass from a father he barely knew and a fortune from a mother he missed with an ache that was still raw after 2 long years. This penthouse, with its panoramic views of the city, felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage, a monument to a success that brought him no joy. Beatrice was his fiancée, a fixture in his life that had been arranged more by social expectation than by genuine affection. He found her cruelty distasteful, but he also found it distant. It was noise like the traffic humming 40 floors below, and he had long since learned to tune out the noise. He should intervene. A part of him, a small, atrophied part that remembered his mother's lessons on kindness, knew he should. But the effort felt monumental. It was easier to remain silent, to let the world unfold without his interference. He was tired, so deeply existentially tired. Beatrice would handle it. She always did. He took a sip of his drink and turned away, the quiet dignity of the new Maid already fading from his mind. In that moment, he had just allowed the first stone to be cast in a war he didn't yet know he was destined to fight, a war for his own soul. What he couldn't possibly comprehend was that the quiet woman in the gray uniform held the key not only to his future, but to the very heart of his past. The world he had built to insulate himself from pain was about to be shattered, and it would all begin with an injustice he chose to ignore. The next day, the incident escalated. Beatrice, it seemed, was not content with a simple verbal lashing. She had decided Alara was a project, a symbol of the imperfection she was determined to scrub from Julian's world and her future home. The stage was the Grand Library, a 2-story cathedral of books that had been his mother's sanctuary. It was the one room in the penthouse Julian felt any connection to, and therefore it was the room Beatrice was most determined to conquer and redecorate. She stood with a designer, pointing dismissively at the rich mahogany shelves. All of this has to go. So dark. So dated. Julian stood by the window, staring out at the city, pretending not to listen. Alara was dusting the very shelves Beatrice was condemning, her movements careful and respectful. Beatrice saw her and an ugly opportunity dawned in her eyes. You, Maid. Alara turned, her expression placid. What is your name again? It's Alara, ma'am. Alara, Beatrice repeated, drawing the name out with mocking slowness. I need you to fetch me the first edition of The Odyssey from the top shelf. The one in the blue leather binding. It was a test. The shelf was nearly 20 feet high, accessible only by a rolling ladder. It was a task for a librarian, not a cleaner. Alara looked at the ladder, then at Beatrice. Of course, ma'am. She moved toward the ladder with a grace that surprised Julian. She was not flustered. She was not intimidated. She simply began to climb. Halfway up, Beatrice called out, "And do be careful. That book is priceless. If you so much as smudge it, well, I hate to think of the consequences." Her voice was laced with a venomous sweetness that made the designer shift uncomfortably. Julian felt a flicker of something. Annoyance? Pity? He couldn't be sure. He just wanted the scene to be over. Alara reached the top, her fingers gently closing around the ancient volume. As she began her descent, Beatrice moved, ever so slightly, bumping into the base of the ladder. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. The ladder wobbled. Alara gasped, her body lurching as she instinctively clutched the book to her chest to protect it. For a heart-stopping moment, she swayed. Julian's body tensed, ready to move, but she regained her footing, her knuckles white as she gripped the rung. She continued down, her composure absolute. She presented the book to Beatrice with a steady hand. Beatrice snatched it from her. "Took you long enough," she sniffed, not even bothering to look at the book before tossing it onto a nearby table. "You're clumsy, inefficient. Frankly, you're useless." The word hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Julian watched Alara's back as she turned away, her shoulders straight, her head held high. She didn't react, didn't offer a defense. She simply went back to her dusting. And in that moment, watching her quiet, unshakable dignity in the face of such casual malice, Julian felt the first crack appear in the icy wall around his heart. He had allowed this. He had stood by and watched. The word Beatrice had used, useless, echoed in his own mind, but for the first time it wasn't directed at the maid. The incident in the library gnawed at him. Julian began to watch Alara, not with the detached gaze of an employer, but with a burgeoning, unwelcome curiosity. He was a man who dealt in data, in predictable outcomes and quantifiable assets. Alara was an anomaly. She was flawlessly efficient, anticipating needs before they were voiced, leaving spaces immaculate but for the faint, clean scent of lemon polish. Yet, it was her actions when she thought no one was looking that truly intrigued him. He saw her through the security feeds he sometimes monitored out of sheer boredom. He saw her pause to help an older kitchen staff member carry a heavy pot. He saw her find a wallet dropped by a contractor and turn it in immediately, untouched. He saw her sitting during her brief lunch break, not on her phone, but reading a worn paperback, her expression one of intense concentration. One afternoon, he found a note left on his desk, placed next to a steaming cup of tea he hadn't asked for but desperately needed. It was on a simple piece of notepad paper, but the handwriting was exquisite. It was a flowing, elegant cursive, the kind of script that belonged to a bygone era. "Mr. Croft, I noticed you seem tired. This is a chamomile blend with honey. My grandmother always said it soothes the mind." Alara. He stared at the note, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. It was a simple act of kindness, yet it felt more profound than any grand gesture he had received in years. It was human. Meanwhile, Beatrice's campaign against Alara intensified. She would leave smudges on glass surfaces moments after Alara had cleaned them, only to summon her back to point out the shoddy work. She changed her lunch order 3 times in an hour, blaming Alara for misunderstanding her. Each complaint was delivered to Julian with a dramatic sigh. "Darling, I really think we need to let this one go. She's simply not up to our standards." Julian, to his own surprise, found himself defending her. "She seems competent to me," he'd say, his tone clipped. "Just give her time to adjust." His defense only fueled Beatrice's ire. She saw Alara not just as an incompetent maid, but as a challenge to her authority, a tiny gray mouse refusing to be cornered by the sleek penthouse cat. The stakes were no longer about a clean room, they were about dominance. Julian started his own quiet investigation, pulling Alara's employment file. It was sparse. Address in a working-class neighborhood. No family listed. A series of glowing references from previous, far less glamorous jobs. Nothing explained the quiet poise, the unshakable integrity, or the beautiful, anachronistic handwriting. She was a puzzle, and for the first time since his mother's death, Julian Croft felt the desire to solve one. A late autumn storm descended upon the city, a furious onslaught of wind and rain that turned the sky to bruised purple. The winds were so severe that the city authorities advised against all travel. The penthouse, usually a silent sanctuary above the urban fray, felt like a ship tossed on a tumultuous sea. The staff were sent home early, all except one. Alara, whose shift ended last, had been about to leave when the storm hit its peak. She was now stranded, a quiet presence in the vast, empty space. Julian found her in the kitchen, carefully wiping down the stainless steel counters, a task she had already completed hours earlier. It was clear she was trying to stay busy, to remain invisible. Beatrice had left for a gala prep spa day before the storm hit and was now marooned at a five-star hotel across town. A fact she bemoaned in a string of increasingly frantic text messages. For the first time in months, Julian was alone, save for the maid he barely knew. "You can stop," he said, his voice startling her. She turned, her hands stilling on the cloth. "Sir, the kitchen is clean. You've been working for 10 hours. Please sit," he gestured to the small staff table in the corner. Hesitantly, she sat. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the howl of the wind against the floor-to-ceiling windows. To fill it, Julian found himself speaking. "That note you left me. The tea." "Thank you," Elara offered a small, shy smile. "You're welcome, Mr. Croft. You carry a great deal of sadness. I see it in your eyes." Her directness was disarming. No one spoke to him like that. "Do you?" he murmured, studying her. "And what do you know of sadness?" A shadow passed over her face, a fleeting glimpse of a pain that ran deep. "I know that it is a heavy coat, and sometimes you forget you are even wearing it until a moment of kindness makes you feel its weight." She spoke with a simple, profound wisdom that cut through his defenses. "I lost my parents when I was young," she said softly, her gaze distant. "And the woman who raised me, my grandmother, passed away last year. She was my everything. She taught me that dignity isn't something someone can give you or take from you. It is something you hold within yourself, no matter the storm." Julian thought of his own mother, of her warmth, her laughter, the way she could fill a room with light. He hadn't spoken of her to anyone, not really, not even to Beatrice. But with this woman, a virtual stranger, he felt an inexplicable urge to share the burden. "I lost my mother 2 years ago," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "This place, the company, it was all hers, really, her spirit. I feel like I'm just a ghost haunting it." Elara listened, her eyes filled with a deep, genuine empathy that he had not seen in years. "A spirit is not a ghost, Mr. Croft. It is a presence. Her presence is still here. In the books she loved, in the kindness she taught you. She tried to teach me." Julian corrected, a bitter edge to his voice. "I'm not sure I was a very good student." For the first time, Elara's expression became something more than just placid or empathetic. It was knowing. "It is never too late to learn a lesson," she whispered, as the storm raged on outside. In the quiet intimacy of the storm-lashed penthouse, a fragile bridge of trust was being built between two disparate souls, a bridge that would soon be tested by a revelation neither of them could have ever predicted. The storm passed, but the conversation lingered in Julian's mind. Elara's words about his mother had unsettled him, stirring a deep-seated longing to reconnect with the woman he had lost. That weekend, he found himself drawn to his mother's study, a room he had kept locked and untouched since her death. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and her faint, floral perfume. He ran his hand over her worn leather chair, sat at her desk, and for the first time in 2 years opened the drawers. Inside, beneath stacks of foundation paperwork and correspondence, was a small, velvet-bound journal. His breath caught in his throat. It was her private diary. With trembling hands, he opened it. The pages were filled with her graceful, looping script, a handwriting as familiar to him as his own reflection. He read about her hopes for the company, her love for him, her quiet frustrations with his father's cold pragmatism. And then he saw a name repeated over and over again. Lillian. He read on, piecing the story together. Lillian was his mother's childhood friend, a woman from a poor background with a brilliant mind and a kind heart. His mother, an heiress even then, had paid for Lillian's education. They had been inseparable, two sides of the same coin. "Lillian has a daughter now," one entry read. "A beautiful little girl named Elara. I pray she inherits her mother's strength. I am teaching Lillian to write in the cursive style my own governess taught me. She learns so quickly. Her script is becoming a perfect mirror of my own." Julian's blood ran cold. He slammed the journal shut, his heart hammering against his ribs. Couldn't be. It was a coincidence. A common name, But the handwriting, he raced from the study, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and dawning, impossible truth. He found the note Alara had left him, the one about the chamomile tea. He laid it on the desk beside his mother's open journal. It was not similar. It was not a mirror. It was identical. Every loop, every slant, every elegant flourish. The woman he had allowed his fiancée to call useless, the woman he had dismissed as just another member of the staff, was inextricably linked to the most important person in his life. He felt a wave of nausea and shame. He now understood her quiet dignity, her unshakable poise. It was a legacy, an inheritance of character passed down from a mother his own had cherished. And Beatrice wasn't just being cruel to a maid. She was desecrating a memory. She was spitting on the grave of his mother's dearest friendship. The fight was no longer about Alara's job. It was about his mother's honor. The stakes had just been raised from a matter of employment to a battle for the very soul of his family's legacy. He now knew what he had to do. A cold, calculated fury replaced Julian's grief-stricken apathy. He was no longer a passive observer in his own life. He was a man with a mission. His purpose was singular, to protect Alara and to expose Beatrice for the venomous creature she was. He began to move his pieces across the chessboard of his life with the same ruthless efficiency that had built his empire. He called his head of security, a former intelligence officer named Marcus who was fiercely loyal to his family. "Marcus," he said, his voice low and steady, "I need full surveillance on Beatrice Sterling. Audio, video, financials. I want to know everything." Discreetly, "Consider it done, Mr. Croft," came the simple reply. Julian then turned his attention to Alara. He couldn't reveal what he knew, not yet. The shock would be too much, and he needed her to continue as she was, to be the unwitting bait in his trap. But he could protect her. He issued a new household directive. All staff management, including complaints and scheduling, would now report directly to him. Beatrice was furious. "What is the meaning of this, Julian? You're undermining my authority in my own home." "It is not your home yet, Beatrice," he replied coolly, his gaze like chips of ice. "And I've decided to take a more active role in its management." He began creating opportunities to speak with Alara, asking about her day, her interests, her life, all under the guise of being a more engaged employer. He learned about her love for classic literature, a passion she'd inherited from her mother, Lillian. He learned of her quiet volunteer work at a local literacy center. Each new detail was like a brushstroke, painting a portrait of a woman of profound substance and integrity, a portrait that stood in stark, damning contrast to Beatrice's shallow vanity. He felt a powerful, protective urge swell within him, an emotion so fierce it startled him. This was more than just honoring his mother. It was about Alara herself. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the remarkable person she was. His choice was made. He would not just shield her from the storm. He would become the storm that swept away the one who threatened her. He was ready to risk his engagement, his social standing, and the placid, orderly world he had constructed. For the first time in years, Julian Croft was not just existing. He was fighting for something. Beatrice, stripped of her direct power over the staff, grew more desperate and more cunning. She sensed the shift in Julian, the new steel in his spine and the way his eyes would soften when he looked at Alara. Her jealousy, mingled with her innate cruelty, festered into a truly evil plan. She decided to destroy Alara in a way that would be final and undeniable. The annual Vance Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, was a week away. It was an event founded by Julian's mother to promote arts and education. Beatrice saw it as the perfect stage for her masterstroke. She waited for a day when she knew Julian was locked in back-to-back meetings downtown. She entered his mother's study, a room she had always despised, and went straight to the velvet-lined jewelry box on the vanity. From it, she took his mother's favorite necklace, a breathtaking piece of sapphires and diamonds, instantly recognizable to anyone in their circle. Later that afternoon, under the pretense of looking for a lost earring, she gained access to the staff locker room. The entire act was captured on a microcamera Marcus had installed in a smoke detector just days before. The footage was crystal clear. Beatrice, her face a mask of smug satisfaction, slipping the priceless necklace into the side pocket of Alara's simple cloth handbag. The next morning, she unleashed her trap. She feigned hysteria, storming into Julian's office. "It's gone. Julian, your mother's sapphire necklace. It's been stolen." Julian played his part, feigning shock and concern. "Are you certain, Beatrice?" "Of course, I'm certain. I wanted to wear it to the gala to honor her, and it's gone." Her eyes narrowed. "I think I know who took it. That new maid, Alara. She's always lurking, watching." Julian called security, as he knew she would demand. He stood by, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest, as they were forced to search Alara's belongings in front of a small audience of horrified staff. The moment the head of security pulled the glittering necklace from her bag, Alara's face went white with shock. A gasp went through the room. I don't understand," she stammered, looking at Julian, her eyes wide with confusion and betrayal. "I would never." Beatrice stepped forward, her voice dripping with triumphant pity. "Oh, you poor thing. Did you really think you could get away with it?" The police were called. Alara was taken for questioning. To everyone watching, it was an open and shut case. The maid had been caught red-handed. Beatrice had won. Julian watched Alara being led away, the image of her frightened, betrayed face searing itself into his soul. He felt a surge of self-loathing so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He had set this stage. He had allowed her to be humiliated, to be terrified, all for the sake of his plan. He could only pray that the final act would be worth the agony of this one. The night of the Vance Foundation Gala arrived. The ballroom glittered, a sea of diamonds and designer gowns. Beatrice was radiant at Julian's side, the conquering queen. She had never been more charming, accepting condolences from guests about the dreadful business with the thieving maid. "It's just so hard to find good help these days," she'd sigh, basking in the sympathy. Alara had been released pending investigation, the charges still hanging over her head like the sword of Damocles. Julian had paid her bail anonymously, but he hadn't contacted her, knowing it would compromise the final reveal. He could only imagine her fear and confusion. As he stood on the dais, preparing for the keynote address, he looked out at the sea of expectant faces. He saw Beatrice in the front row, preening for the cameras. His gaze swept the room, and he felt a profound emptiness. This was his world. Shallow, transactional, and cold. It was a world his mother had navigated but never truly belonged to. It was a world he was about to set on fire. He tapped the microphone, and a hush fell over the room. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and resonant. "Thank you all for coming to support the Vance Foundation, a cause my mother held so dear. This year, our theme is Legacy, what it means to leave one, and what it means to honor one." He paused, his eyes finding Beatrice's. "My fiancée, Beatrice Sterling, recently spoke of honoring my mother by wearing her favorite necklace. Unfortunately, that necklace was reported stolen." A murmur went through the crowd. Beatrice arranged her features into a mask of tragic solemnity. "The evidence pointed to a member of my staff," Julian continued, his voice hardening. "A woman named Alara Vance. She was arrested, her reputation ruined. But legacy is about truth. And the truth is often hidden from view." On the enormous screen behind him, a video began to play. It was not the planned slideshow of the Foundation's achievements. It was silent, grainy security footage of the staff locker room. The crowd gasped as they watched Beatrice Sterling, in crystal clear high definition, plant the sapphire necklace in Alara's bag. Beatrice's face went from triumphant to ashen in a single heartbeat. "Julian, what is this? It's doctored," she shrieked, rising from her seat. But Julian wasn't finished. "Beatrice's cruelty was not random," he said, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "It was directed at a woman she instinctively knew was her superior in every way that truly matters. A woman of character, of dignity, Of grace, the image on the screen changed, now showing two documents side by side. On the left, a page from his mother's journal. On the right, the simple note Alara had left him about the tea. "What you see here," Julian announced, "is my mother's handwriting, and next to it Alara's. They are identical, because Alara's mother was my mother's dearest and oldest friend. A woman my mother loved like a sister." The room exploded in a cacophony of shocked whispers. Julian's gaze never left Beatrice. "You did not just frame a maid, Beatrice. You desecrated a sacred bond. You attacked the living embodiment of my mother's legacy of kindness and friendship." He walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes now fixed on a figure standing hesitantly by the ballroom entrance. It was Alara, brought there by Marcus at his request. Her eyes were wide, filled with tears as the truth of her connection to his family washed over her. He descended the stairs and walked directly to her, ignoring the hundreds of cameras now flashing in their direction. He stopped before her, and in front of the entire glittering assembly of the city's elite, Julian Croft, the untouchable billionaire, dropped to his knees. He took her hand. "Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry, for my blindness, for my silence, for ever allowing anyone to treat you with anything less than the profound respect you deserve. Can you ever forgive me?" The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Beatrice. As security discreetly escorted her from the ballroom, her face a grotesque mask of rage and humiliation, news alerts were already flashing on every phone in the room. Her world did not just crumble. It was obliterated in a public spectacle of her own making. Her social invitations vanished overnight. Her endorsements were pulled. Her family, deeply embarrassed and facing financial ruin from the scandal, disowned her. She became a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. The charges against Alara were, of course, immediately dropped, replaced by a new investigation into Beatrice for filing a false police report and perjury. But in the quiet aftermath of the gala storm, Julian and Alara found their own still center. He had led her away from the clamor to a secluded terrace overlooking the city lights. For a long time, they stood in silence, the enormity of the evening settling around them. "My mother, Lillian," Alara finally whispered, her voice trembling. "She told me stories about her friend, the kind heiress. She never told me it was your mother. She didn't want me to feel I was owed anything." "You are owed everything," Julian said, his voice gentle. "You are owed an apology from a world that judges people on their station and not their character. And you are owed one from me." He explained everything. His initial apathy, the growing curiosity, the discovery in the journal, and the painful necessity of the trap he had set. "I had to let it happen, Alara. I had to let her expose herself so completely that there would be no doubt. But seeing you so hurt, it was the hardest thing I have ever done." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but also with understanding. "You did what you had to do to bring the truth to light. My grandmother used to say, 'Truth is a stubborn root. You can bury it, but it will always find its way to the sun.'" In that moment, the bond that had been forged in a storm and solidified by a shared legacy blossomed into something more. It was a connection built not on passion or convenience, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and a profound, healing truth. His old life of cold isolation was over, incinerated in the blaze of the gala. A new life, one of warmth and purpose, was just beginning. 1 year later, the Julian Croft penthouse was unrecognizable. The cold white marble and minimalist furniture had been replaced with warm woods, comfortable sofas, and shelves overflowing with books. The air, once sterile, now carried the scent of baking bread and fresh flowers. It was no longer a monument. It was a home. Julian and Alara stood side by side at the large window, looking out at the city. Their hands were intertwined, a comfortable, familiar gesture. After the gala, their relationship had grown organically, moving from apology and gratitude to friendship, and finally to a deep and abiding love. Julian had transformed not just his home, but his entire life. He had publicly rejected the predatory ethos of his father's business practices, restructuring the company to prioritize employee welfare and ethical sourcing. But their true shared passion was the foundation. Renamed the Vance Lillian Foundation, it had been completely reimagined. Its new mission was to provide educational grants, vocational training, and literacy programs for working-class women like Alara and her mother. Alara was no longer a maid. She was the foundation's executive director, her quiet competence and deep empathy making her a brilliant and beloved leader. Julian served as the chairman, using his wealth and influence to amplify her vision. Today, they had just hosted the first scholarship luncheon in the penthouse. It wasn't a gala for the rich, but a celebration for the recipients. Single mothers, recent immigrants, women seeking a second chance. The room had been filled with joyous, hopeful energy, a stark contrast to the soulless affairs of Julian's past. "Your mother would be so proud," Alara said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Both of our mothers," Julian corrected, squeezing her hand. "They believed in the power of kindness, in the dignity of all people. We're just trying to honor their legacy." He looked at her, at the incredible woman who had walked into his life and awakened his sleeping soul. She had not been a damsel in distress to be rescued, but a beacon of light that had guided him out of his own darkness. The world had called her a maid, had deemed her useless, but he knew the truth. She was the most valuable person he had ever met, the keeper of a legacy far richer than any fortune. What truly defines a person's worth? Is it the balance in their bank account or the integrity in their heart? Sometimes, it takes seeing the world through another's eyes to finally understand your own.